So a listener named Steven wrote about the shopping chapter, and he says, what does Thad think of the idea of the war for the mind? Sorry.
I saw that.
Applied behaviorism and its rise in the 20th century. In a corporatized world, does it change his view of what rebellion is? Can one even be a renegade in a corporatized context? Who are today's rebels? Well, there's more to that, but we can pause there for a second.
So first of all, it's kind of interesting. My first question was basically what I would call a cultural conservative question, and this one is more progressive sounding. Right? You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's progressive sounding. But I think obviously anybody who's liberty minded but has also spent some time looking into the schools, behaviorism is definitely a big concern, because that seemed to be a lab for that in the 20th century.
So I am reminded of our very, very first conversation, which we had about Bernays, remember?
Yeah, I think that's part of it. Let me just read it again. What does Thad think of the idea of a war for the mind, which Bernays definitely would have been a part of, applied behaviorism and its rise in the 20th century? So that involves, obviously, a lot of players. And Bernays was, I think, coming from a slightly different point of view, where he was borrowing from his uncle's work. And in a nutshell, people are stupid animals, and, they're relatively easy to control as stimulus response mechanisms.
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, this is, so Bernays, as I said to you then, Bernays worked both for private advertisers, and then he worked for the government.
Yeah.
Right? So now, when you're using this shit, in schools, in public schools, what am I going to tell you? I mean, you got a captive audience, you've got children. There's no choice here. You can do a whole lot there against people's will in terms of shaping their minds. So guess what I think about that? Now, when it's, the shopping chapter, one of the major arguments in it is that consumers have most or all of the power in the relationship with the producers. That as long as there's a market, as long as there's a competitive market. So I don't believe in, I don't believe that advertisers create desires or basically force us to have desires or needs, or create artificial needs. They have to find something that we already want in order for us to buy it, to want it.
What about De Beers diamonds?
What about what?
De Beers diamonds.
So yeah, I thought this would be a nice segue to Carlos's question. So why don't you ask it in its full form?
Okay, fair enough. Because you bring up that they're not creating these needs. But I mean, no one really was asking for the iPhone before it came out. No one was really asking for a diamond wedding ring before De Beers created this advertising campaign.
I think, but to clarify there, I think those are different, right?
You're right, they are different.
Diamond rings are retarded.
Yeah,
like, that
retarded.
doesn't even make any sense. That's just a ridiculous thing. But the iPhone, somebody posted something online the other day that I thought was interesting. It was a picture of this Radio Shack sale from like 1990 something, right? Every item that they're advertising as being on sale can be done by a smartphone today. Yeah. So you're looking at a sale where you go to Radio Shack and you invest like $1,500 and you can have all these things that your phone can do today.
Right. Steve Jobs took all those pre-existing desires and put them into one device. That's all.
Fair enough. Right. But what about the De Beers diamonds thing? Because
so De Beers, okay, so what are they actually selling? They're not just selling the diamond, right? They're selling, I don't know. I don't know which ad you're talking about. So, but
forever.
Describe the ad.
Yeah, I mean, the whole argument was diamonds are forever, and you show your true love to a woman by putting a diamond ring on her. And the thing is, there was nothing really like that before it. There was no real market for that. Well, I mean, I guess.
What do you mean? No desire for a permanent relationship? What do you mean? That's existed.
But to be embodied by a rock,
right? Well, but the desire was that they're not selling. They're just attaching the rock to this desire, but the desire is already there.
Well, that's all advertising is, yeah.
For lifelong monogamy or whatever, right? So, and that's it. It represents that. But that has to make sense to people, right? if it had been a turd, it wouldn't have sold it, right?
But that's what a diamond rock is. It's just a turd with like 10,000 years of compressed.
Right. A rock, this piece of rock is forever. It's not. They've got to find something we already want. So there actually already were associations between gemstones and relationships. Right.
Yeah, I think what they were able to do was essentially, one, they created artificial scarcity by hoarding, and then they also had the African mines, which are also backed by the government. But there's also the issue of they basically made it so that it seemed expensive, because it shouldn't be expensive.
Well, De Beers is, there's a much broader context here. Like De Beers was Cecil Rhodes, and Cecil
hold on,
Rhodes.
It's expensive because we attach value to it.
Yeah, my argument sucked.
Well, so I think there's this evil that's put into the whole De Beers thing and the whole diamond thing. A lot of it has to do with who the progenitor of that idea was, or at least the De Beers mining company, and that was Cecil Rhodes, who was, involved in every real conspiracy.
He's actually the NWO.
Yeah, like
he's real NWO. He's old school.
And it's interesting that it actually kind of lines up with a lot of what you talk about. Like, here comes this Brit in the latter half of the 1800s who thinks it's his moral obligation to reshape the entire world in the British image. And we see so much of that, and we see that being replicated in America through what we just talked about in the last show, that, the British were here first as far as the Europeans were concerned, and the Spanish were no longer an issue. So they got to establish what the cultural norms were, and then everybody else had to come in and conform to that. And it's funny that that's something that has gone on elsewhere in the world, and it was an active plan out of Oxford University. Rhodes professor at Oxford, John Ruskin, told Rhodes and his classmates that they have a duty to spread British culture.
Yeah, we got it from the Brits. I mean, we didn't invent it.
Mm-hmm.
The Brits invented it. We perfected it, I guess. But, well, I don't know. The Brits, for sure, yeah. Colonialism, that's the basis of it, right?
Yeah.
It wasn't just economic exploitation. In fact, I would argue it wouldn't have happened without the humanitarian argument. That's actually what motivated people to go abroad, was to uplift the masses abroad in places like India and South Africa.
So there was a public momentum that carried small private interests to what they needed to do.